A poor waitress. Helped a lost tourist find his hotel, not knowing he was a billionaire. Who? The rain fell in steady sheets over Santorini, slicking the cobblestone streets and turning the glow of lanterns into smeared halos across the wet ground. It was close to midnight, and most of the island had tucked itself behind closed shutters and glowing windows. On a quiet street near the cliffs, the rain was louder than footsteps, louder than breathing. Amara adjusted the straps of her worn-out backpack and pulled the thin hood of her coat tighter around her face. Her shoes were soaked through, every step squished cold and familiar. She had just finished a double shift at the seaside cafe, 10 hours on her feet, 5 of them without a break. And now she was heading home to the tiny apartment she shared with her 12-year-old sister, Lila, who was running a fever and waiting with a damp washcloth on her head and no dinner. The streets were nearly empty except for the occasional scooter splashing past and one sleeping figure curled in a shop doorway. Then she heard it. "Miss, please, I'm sorry, I think I'm lost." She stopped, her heart jerking slightly at the voice. It wasn't angry or aggressive, it was frightened, out of place. She turned and saw a man standing awkwardly beneath the dim awning of a closed bakery. He was drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his coat dripping water onto his shoes. In his hands was a piece of soggy paper. "I lost my phone," he said, his accent heavy. French, maybe. "I was walking from the ferry terminal. I thought the hotel was nearby." Amara stepped closer, her eyes scanning the paper. It was a printed map, partially torn, with the name of a hotel circled in blue ink. The street name was smudged, but she recognized it. "That's about 7 blocks from here," she said, tilting her head. "You've been going the wrong way." The man closed his eyes briefly. "I knew it. I turned left instead of right. I've been walking in circles." She hesitated. The apartment was 20 minutes away, and she needed to stop at the pharmacy for Lila's medicine. But the man looked genuinely lost and freezing. "I can walk you there," she said suddenly. His eyes widened. "You don't have to. It's okay. I'll figure it out." "It's fine," she replied with a small smile. "Besides, you look like you might turn into an icicle." He laughed, grateful. "Merci. Thank you. Truly." They walked side by side under the rain, neither of them speaking for a few seconds. The island around them pulsed gently, the splash of waves against the cliffs, the rustle of wind funneling between buildings, the faint glow of lanterns swaying in the breeze. "My name's Elias," he said after a while. "I'm from Paris. First time in Santorini." "Amara," she replied. "And you picked quite the weather to visit." "I was supposed to arrive this afternoon," he admitted. "But the flight was delayed, then my luggage got lost, then my phone died, and, well, now I'm just the cliché tourist." "You're not the worst I've seen," Amara said, and he chuckled again. She learned he was in town for a bit of thinking, as he put it, not work, not vacation, exactly. Just space. Sometimes Paris was too loud, even in silence. She didn't understand entirely, but she nodded anyway. "And you?" he asked. "You work nearby?" "The cafe on the cliffs," she said. "I've been there almost 3 years." He glanced at her with soft curiosity. "And what do you do when you're not saving lost tourists?" Amara smiled faintly. "Mostly just try to keep the lights on and raise my little sister." He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. When they reached the hotel, an old building tucked between a boutique shop and a taverna, Elias stopped in front of the door. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do this." "It's fine," Amara said, brushing her wet bangs from her face. "Just glad you found your way." Elias looked at her for a moment longer, then pulled something from his coat pocket, a handkerchief surprisingly clean and neatly folded. "You gave me your time. Let me give you something warm." She took it with hesitation, then nodded once. "Good night, Elias." "Good night, Amara." She turned and disappeared into the rain, neither of them knowing in that moment how much their lives had just changed. The apartment smelled faintly of damp socks and detergent when Amara stepped inside, shivering from the rain. The heater hadn't worked properly in weeks. The hallway light flickered once before going dark entirely. She left her wet shoes by the door, her socks squelching against the cracked linoleum floor. "Lila?" she called softly. "In here," came a weak voice from the small bedroom. Amara dropped her bag and walked in. Her sister lay curled up on the narrow mattress, a towel pressed to her forehead. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked smaller than usual, swallowed by the oversized hoodie she wore. "Hey," Amara whispered, brushing damp hair from the girl's face. "Still hot?" Lila nodded, her eyes glassy. Amara leaned down and kissed her forehead, then made her way to the tiny kitchen. She opened the fridge, nothing but a bottle of olive oil, half a lemon, and a single egg that had likely expired last week. The cupboard wasn't much better. A bag of instant noodles, crumpled, but still sealed, sat alone on the shelf. She sighed, filled a small pot with water, and set it on the stove. As the noodles cooked, she added a pinch of salt, the egg, and a drop of olive oil, stirring carefully. It wasn't a meal, it was survival. Back in the bedroom, she fed Lila slowly, spoon by spoon, until the girl's eyelids began to droop. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Lila asked sleepily. "Of course," Amara whispered, though she knew it was a lie. After tucking her in, Amara sat at the kitchen table, still damp from the rain, and opened her old laptop. The screen flickered twice before turning on. She pulled up the scholarship application she'd started weeks ago, but never had time to finish. She filled in her name, her story, her dreams. She edited and re-edited every word until the sun started to rise. She didn't write about being tired, or scared, or hungry. She wrote about wanting to teach, to build something that mattered, to give kids like Lila a better future. The next morning began like every other for Amara. She skipped breakfast, tied her hair back into a messy bun, slipped on her worn sneakers, and walked to the cafe. On the way out, she passed the landlord in the dim hallway. "You're behind again," he said, arms crossed. 3 days, or I change the locks." "I'll get it," Amara replied, her voice tight but firm. "I promise." The cafe buzzed with noise, clinking cutlery, sizzling pans, murmurs of tourists, and shouted orders across the counter. Amara tied on her apron and smiled through the morning rush. She served coffee to men who didn't look up, wiped syrup from sticky menus, filled ketchup bottles, and cleared dishes too heavy for her aching wrists. By noon, her legs throbbed. By 2, her lower back had gone numb. At 5, she gulped down a glass of water, sat for 3 minutes behind the staff fridge, then jumped back up when her name was yelled during her break. She leaned against the alley wall behind the cafe, staring at her phone. No calls, no responses to her scholarship applications. Nothing. Her coworker Carla lit a cigarette beside her. "You looked like you wrestled a storm last night." Amara chuckled without humor. "Something like that." Carla squinted. "I saw you walking some guy last night. Tourist." Amara nodded. "He got lost. No phone. Didn't know where his hotel was. I helped him in the rain." "He looked like he could afford a taxi made of gold," Carla said, exhaling smoke. "I didn't help him because he was rich," Amara said firmly. "I helped him because no one else would have." Carla shook her head. "You're going to burn out." "Maybe," Amara said, looking up at the dull gray sky. "But not today." She returned inside, tied her apron again, and smiled at the next customer, an elderly woman who ordered coffee with too much sugar and asked about the weather like it mattered more than anything else in the world. That night, Amara counted the tips she'd made, $18.43, enough to buy some medicine for Lila and maybe a loaf of bread. As she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, her steps slow and sore, she didn't think about Elias or what might have happened if she hadn't stopped to help him. She only thought of Lila, of bills due, of dreams she still dared to write about in applications that might never get answered. But even in that exhaustion, beneath the ache and the endlessness of it all, there was still something soft and warm inside her. Hope, fragile, foolish, but still alive. She didn't know that her quiet choice to help a stranger in the rain had already set something greater in motion. She only knew how to keep going, one step at a time. The bell above the cafe door jingled, barely audible over the clatter of dishes and hum of conversations. Amara glanced up from behind the counter, ready to greet another customer with the same practiced smile. But the smile faltered when she saw him. Elias looked nothing like the man she had found that rainy night. His coat was crisp, tailored to perfection. His shoes were dry and polished. His dark scarf was wrapped neatly at the collar. He moved with quiet confidence, but when his eyes landed on hers, something gentler emerged. Recognition, and something more. "Say, Amara," he said, walking toward her, his voice soft but clear. "You found me when I was completely lost." She blinked. "You made it," she replied, almost in disbelief. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in clear plastic. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. It was the handkerchief, the one she had offered him in the rain, now washed, pressed, folded neatly, and sealed to keep it safe. "I couldn't leave the city without returning this," he added, "and to say thank you properly." Amara hesitated, glancing around the cafe. Her manager was busy yelling at someone in the kitchen. The line of customers hadn't formed yet. She had 10 minutes, maybe less. Elias caught her hesitation. "If this is a bad time, I understand." She looked back at him. Something in his presence, calm, unhurried, made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "I have a break coming up," she said finally. 15 minutes. I'd be honored to borrow them." They walked to a nearby park, still damp from the previous night's rain, but touched by a rare patch of winter sunlight. Elias bought them both coffee from a street cart, his black, hers sweet and creamy. They sat on a bench, a light breeze rustling the bare trees above. Elias took a sip, then looked at her. "So, how are you?" She shrugged instinctively. "I'm okay?" He tilted his head, studying her. "No, I mean, how are you really?" The question stunned her, not because it was profound, but because no one ever asked it like that. Not with intention, not with genuine interest. She let the silence linger before answering. "Tired," she admitted, "most of the time, worried sometimes, hopeful sometimes, sometimes not." Elias nodded, as if those words made perfect sense to him. "What about you?" she asked. "You found your phone, your hotel. What brings you here again?" "I stayed longer than I planned," he said. "Something about this city, or maybe just being lost here. It reminded me how to feel small again. It's humbling." She chuckled lightly. "Most people hate feeling small." "I used to," he admitted, "but now I think it's when we're small that we notice the most." They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence. "Do you always help strangers?" he asked. "Only the ones who look like they need it," she replied. "Then I'm lucky," he said, glancing at her with a half-smile. "You look like a drowned puppy," Amara teased, her lips curling into a faint smile. "I felt like one," Elias admitted, with a soft laugh. They shared a moment of genuine laughter, the kind that lightens the weight of the world for just a heartbeat. But before the warmth could fully settle, Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket. "Break's over," she said. Standing slowly, "I should head back." "Of course," Elias replied, rising with her. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "May I see you again?" Amara paused, not out of suspicion, but surprise. It wasn't often anyone asked to see her for who she was, not what she did. "Maybe," she said finally. "I work a lot." "I'm good at finding people," Elias responded with a small smile. She gave him a slight nod, then turned back toward the cafe. As she walked away, the clang of dishes and shouting voices surrounded her, but something inside her had shifted quietly. For the first time in years, someone had asked about her, not the worker, not the older sister, not the struggling tenant. Just Amara. They began meeting in the early mornings, always before Amara's shift started. Santorini was quieter then, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and there was a kind of peace they both seemed to need. Sometimes they sat at a quaint cafe near the old windmill, where the barista remembered their orders by the third visit. Black coffee for Elias, chai latte for Amara. Other times they walked along the cliffs of Oya, watching the sky shift from gray to gold as the sun rose over the Aegean Sea. One morning, Elias brought 2 croissants wrapped in brown paper. They sat on a bench outside the town library, sharing the buttery pastries in silence. Around them, the rhythm of life began, taxis honking, bicycles whirring, storefronts opening. Amara smiled softly. "This feels stolen." "Stolen?" Elias asked, eyebrows raised. "Like we stole a little piece of calm before the world wakes up." Elias nodded. "Then I hope no one calls the police." She laughed, and for a moment she looked lighter, less weighed down by the world. Over the days that followed, they talked, not in long monologues or dramatic confessions, but in pieces, fragments, one sentence at a time. "My parents died when I was 16, Amara told him one day, her voice flat but not bitter. "Car crash. I had to grow up fast. Lila was just 6. "I'm sorry," Elias said gently. "I wanted to be a teacher," she continued. "Still do. Life, other ideas." He didn't offer pity, only silence, respectful and listening. And he shared his own truth slowly, like someone testing the water after years of drowning. "I used to be someone important," he said one morning as they sat near a row of blooming bougainvillea. "At least to the world. My name was in articles. People quoted things I said in meetings." Amara glanced at him. "But I haven't felt like anyone in a long time," he admitted. "After my mother passed, the lights stayed on, but nothing inside me did." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Everyone saw my name," he said quietly, "but no one saw me." Amara said nothing for a moment. She simply reached over and touched his wrist lightly. No words, just presence. They had both known absence, both learned to survive in spaces where no one looked too closely. And now, in those simple moments, reading side by side at the library, standing beneath city trees, they were being seen again. Not in the way the world sees, but the way someone sees when they actually care. One morning, as a light mist fell, Elias pulled a scarf tighter around Amara's neck before she could protest. "Santorini winds have no manners," he said with a teasing grin. She rolled her eyes, but didn't move away. Another day she brought him a thermos of tea with honey. "Your throat sounded hoarse yesterday," she explained. "Are you always this kind?" he asked. She shrugged. "Only to people who return my handkerchiefs." He smiled, a real unguarded smile, and she realized how rare it was for someone like him to laugh without reserve. Their connection wasn't loud or sweeping. It wasn't about grand declarations or stolen kisses. It was the kind of bond that formed in the quiet, through shared silences, understanding glances, and the slow unraveling of walls they'd both built too high, too early. For Amara, it was the first time in years someone had asked what she dreamed of becoming, not just how she planned to survive the week. For Elias, it was the first time someone had looked at him without expecting anything but honesty. One morning, just before she left for her shift, he walked her to the cafe door. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but if they had, I might never have stopped to help a man in the rain." He looked at her then, not with admiration, not with gratitude, but with something much deeper. And she saw it. He was healing. And maybe, just maybe, so was she. The article dropped like a bomb. It was a slow morning at the cafe when Carla slammed her phone on the counter. "Amara, is this your lost tourist?" Amara leaned over, expecting to see something silly, maybe a celebrity look-alike meme, but her breath caught when she saw the headline. French tech billionaire Elias Hawthorne spotted in Santorini. Low profile, visit raises questions. There was a photo taken just days earlier. Elias walking through the cobblestone streets, scarf loose around his neck, coffee in hand, smiling, relaxed, alive. Amara stepped back, her heart thudding in her chest. She reread the words. CEO of Hawthorne Technologies, one of Europe's richest men, enigmatic disappearance, rumored to be taking a sabbatical after his mother's death. Everything blurred. She didn't speak for the rest of her shift. That evening, she didn't go to the park where Elias usually waited. She went home, held Lila longer than usual, and stared at the same wall for hours. The memories twisted in her mind, the way he had spoken, his careful silence about work, his modest clothes, his insistence on knowing her without expectations. But he had lied, or rather omitted, hidden the biggest part of himself. And maybe she had fallen for someone who didn't really exist. The next morning, he came to the cafe. He didn't dress differently. He didn't bring bodyguards, just the same coat, the same gentle look in his eyes. She met him outside, arms crossed, heart racing. "So it's true," she said. He nodded. "Yes, I'm a billionaire." "How long were you going to keep that from me?" "I didn't plan to tell you it all at first," he admitted, "because I didn't want that version of me to be the one you met." She laughed bitterly. "And what version did you show me? The poor lost man act?" He stepped closer. "No, that was real. Everything I said was real. I was lost, just not in the way you thought." Amara looked away, her jaw tight. "You lied to me." "I hid something, yes," he corrected. "Because the moment people know my name, they stop listening. They stop looking." "You didn't think I deserved the truth?" "You have no idea what it's like to grow up believing you'll never matter unless someone chooses you," Amara cried, her voice breaking. "And now that someone did, it still feels like a joke." Elias reached out gently. "Amara." She pulled her hand back, her eyes welling up. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You saw someone kind, helpful, sweet, but I'm also tired, angry, messy. I don't belong in your world. I don't care about that world, but I do," she admitted, tears streaming down her face, "because I'll never be good enough for it." "I never meant to make you feel that way," Elias whispered, his voice heavy with regret. "I know," Amara said, stepping back, "but I feel it anyway." Silence stretched between them, heavy and final. "If you need space," Elias said softly, "I'll give it, but not because I've stopped caring. I'm here. I always have been." She didn't respond. She just turned away and walked down the street, her coat flapping in the wind, tears falling before she could stop them. For the first time, Elias didn't follow. Because he understood. This wasn't about the lie. It was about the wound it touched. For Amara, walking away from something that had begun to feel like home was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but she didn't feel worthy of being loved. Not yet. The envelope was small and light, tucked inside the same handkerchief she had once offered him on a rainy night. It was left at the front counter of the cafe with no name, no return address, just her first name written in clean, familiar handwriting. Amara opened it with trembling hands after her shift ended, when the city had gone dark and Lila was already asleep. She unfolded the note, her breath catching as she saw the words written in ink, steady and clear. "Amara, you reminded me how to feel, not as a man with titles, not as someone followed by headlines or watched for his worth, but simply as a human being. I came to Santorini to disappear. I found you instead. I know I hurt you. That was never my intent, but I see now that some wounds aren't mine to heal. I only hope that one day You'll believe you are worthy, not because I say so, but because you finally see it for yourself. And when that day comes, I hope you let someone love you truly. Thank you for everything. Elias. Amara sat at the kitchen table, the letter pressed to her chest. Her eyes were blurry with tears, but for once the tears didn't come from despair. They came from something else, something lighter. Not joy, not yet, but release. She didn't write back, not immediately. Instead, she folded the letter neatly and placed it inside her dresser drawer, beneath a stack of old college brochures and faded photographs. Then she got to work. The next day, she picked up an application form from a local community college. A week later, she sat down with an advisor, explained her financial situation, and asked firmly what it would take to finish her teaching certification. She also signed up to volunteer at a small shelter on the East Side, tutoring immigrant children in English and math. It wasn't paid, but for the first time she felt like she was building something again. Her routine changed. She still worked at the cafe, still paid rent late more often than not, but her steps grew more certain. Her laughter came easier. She spent her nights studying and her weekends helping children pronounce new words, solve fractions, and write their first essays. One afternoon, a little boy she tutored handed her a drawing. It was of her standing in front of a chalkboard, a crown on her head. He had written underneath, "Miss Amara is a queen teacher." She hung it above her bed. The pain didn't vanish. The ache of Elias's absence, the rawness of that final conversation, they still lingered. But they no longer defined her. She stopped looking in the mirror and seeing only the waitress. She saw the fighter, the dreamer, the woman who had fallen and gotten up over and over without asking for applause. Some nights she'd open the drawer, read the letter again, and hold the fabric of the handkerchief between her fingers. She didn't know where Elias had gone or if he would come back. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for anyone to rescue her. She had learned to stand in the rain alone, and now she knew she could love herself through the storm. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden lines across the cracked sidewalk outside the Community Learning Center. Children's laughter echoed from inside the building, high, unburdened, full of life. So. Amara stood by the doorway, helping a student zip up his jacket, when she felt that presence, familiar and steady. She turned. Elias stood at the edge of the curb, holding nothing but a small box in one hand and a quiet expression on his face. No luxury car, no tailored suit, just a simple jacket, jeans, and the soft humility of someone who had left behind everything except the truth. Her breath caught. He didn't rush forward. He waited. When the last student waved goodbye and the door clicked shut behind them, she stepped out to meet him. "You came back," she said, not as a question, but a quiet acknowledgment. "I didn't know if I should," Elias replied, "but I knew I had to." She looked at him carefully. He looked different, and yet the same, the way someone looks after walking through fire and choosing not to burn others with it. "I'm not here to change your life," he said. "I know you don't need saving. You never did." Her eyes softened. "I'm here because you changed mine," he continued, "and I couldn't forget that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a piece of worn velvet, was a simple wooden ring, beautiful in its imperfection, shaped by hand, smoothed by time. "It's not gold," he said, "not diamonds, just something I made from the tree in my mother's backyard, the only thing I kept from the house when I sold it." He looked up. "I don't want a yes from your fear," he said softly. "I want a yes from your peace, from the part of you that knows you're not small, that knows you deserve love, because you do." Amara stared at the ring, at the man, at the space between them that no longer felt unreachable. "You waited," she whispered. "I would have waited forever," he replied. She took a deep breath, blinking back tears. Then she smiled. Not the tired, polite smile she used for customers, not the guarded smile she used with the world, but one that came from somewhere deeper, quieter. "You can put it on later," she said. "For now, just walk with me." He nodded, his eyes shining. They walked down the sidewalk together, side by side, no fanfare, no headlines, no promises of castles or happily ever afters. Just two people, scarred, softened, and finally ready, not because they were perfect, but because they had seen each other at their most human and chosen to stay. Amara reached out and took his hand, closing it gently around the ring. "You can put it on later," she said softly. "For now, just walk with me." He nodded, his eyes shining with unspoken emotion. They walked down the sidewalk together, side by side. No fanfare, no headlines, no promises of castles or happily ever afters. Just two people, scarred but softened, finally ready, not because they were perfect, but because they had seen each other at their most human and chosen to stay. At the corner of a quiet street in Oya, the building stood, a modest brick structure with peeling paint, uneven floorboards, and windows that rattled on windy days. But inside, it pulsed with life. What was once an abandoned laundromat had become something entirely new. Hope House, the community learning center Amara and Elias had dreamed up together. It wasn't a charity or a project stamped with pity. It was a home for children, for the lost, for anyone still learning how to believe they belonged. It had been a year since that rainy night outside the diner, since the wooden ring carved from love and humility, since two lonely people stopped walking apart. Amara taught 4 days a week, reading, writing, basic science, and how to speak up with kindness. She still worked shifts at the cafe occasionally, not for money, but because it grounded her. Elias, once known in boardrooms and business headlines, now wore paint-splattered jeans. He spent his mornings fixing leaky faucets, drawing story posters for the walls, or showing a shy 7-year-old how to sharpen a pencil. He never introduced himself as Elias Hawthorne. He simply said, "Hi, I'm Mr. E." One Friday afternoon, after a reading circle where Amara had made funny voices for every character in the book, a small girl named Mia tugged on Elias's sleeve while he was folding paper towels in the corner. "Mr. E?" she asked, blinking up at him with curious eyes. "Are you rich?" He paused, then smiled. "Not in the way you think." She nodded slowly, satisfied, then ran off to join her friends. Later that day, Amara stood in front of the chalkboard, erasing doodles and scribbles left by her students. Behind her, Elias was climbing a stool to replace a flickering light bulb. She turned around and watched him for a moment, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. They hadn't made any big announcements, no sonograms framed in gold, no party confetti. Just one quiet morning when he'd kissed her forehead and whispered, "I can't wait to meet the third member of our team." One of the boys in the front row raised his hand. "Miss Amara, how did you and Mr. E meet?" The other kids looked up, curious. Amara smiled. "It was raining," she said. "He was lost. No phone, no umbrella, just a crumpled map in the wrong street. I helped him find his hotel." "Why did you help him?" a little voice asked. Amara looked out the window where the clouds were forming again over the caldera. "Because no one else would have," she said simply. Elias came down from the stool, brushing his hands on his pants. "And because," he added with a grin, "she thought I looked like a very wet puppy." The kids giggled. Then Amara's voice softened. "True love doesn't come wrapped in diamonds," she said. "Sometimes it walks beside you on a rainy night with nothing but a lost map and a heart waiting to be found." The room grew quiet, a gentle, thoughtful silence. Elias walked over and took her hand. They didn't need to explain more. Because in that little building, among mismatched chairs, chipped mugs, and the smell of crayons and chalk, their love wasn't about wealth or promises whispered under chandeliers. It was about showing up. It was about seeing someone not for who they should be, but for who they are. As the children packed their bags and spilled out into the dusk, Amara stood in the doorway, watching them disappear into the arms of mothers, siblings, and foster parents. She leaned against Elias's shoulder and whispered, "Do you think we've done something good?" He kissed her temple. "I think we've started something that matters." And maybe that was the greatest love story of all, one built not on grand gestures, but on everyday kindness, not on perfection, but on presence. Because sometimes the smallest act of goodness, a warm hand in the rain, a cup of coffee shared in silence, can be the beginning of a love big enough to change 2 lives and many more. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey, a story born from a rainy night, a quiet act of kindness, and 2 hearts learning to trust again. Amara and Elias's story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it shows up soaking wet, lost, and unexpected, but exactly when we need it most. And sometimes the smallest moments, a shared coffee, a folded handkerchief, a gentle question, can change the course of a lifetime.